Thank you very much, Fergus, and good morning, everybody. And I'm very conscious that if it wasn't for the restrictions, we'd start maybe in the Ashling Hotel in Dublin on this fine January morning, and our coffee would be in our hand. So we'll do the best anyway in the current circumstances. So I'm now going to share the screen. So just bear with me for a minute while this is set up. And slideshow from beginning. I talk out loud, I'm afraid. Okay, here we go. I'm Maeve O'Grady, by the way, and I've been working with adult tutors in adult literacy for some 25 years now. So what we're going to look at today is tutor strategies for engaging and motivating learners. Now, I'm very, very aware that you're going to know a lot of this already, but this is where it's the opportunity to actually share your knowledge, hear ideas, and come away with maybe one or two new ideas, but also to come away feeling, yes, you really understand that, and of course you're motivated. That's the main starting point here. So we bring two perspectives with us in relation to a topic like motivation. So it's about what we know, but it's also about how we know it. We can also bring general questions about the topic. For example, is it your job to motivate the learner? Now, the very fact that you're here and in attendance is certainly telling us that you're interested in motivating the learner. But just to think, is it actually your role? Or another question can be, is motivation an outcome of good practice? Right. So the aim of the workshop then is, first of all, to discuss and share adult literacy practice. And that will enable you to bring to mind the transformations you see in learners and how they come about, because motivation is linked with steps, and then help you identify the resources that are available to you. And in very busy lives, especially in current circumstances, we can often take for granted what's already available and very useful to us. So, like any networking event, it's about the power of naming. If you can't name it, you can't change it. But naming what you already know enables you to change it or improve it or nurture it, value it. So what we'll actually do is I'll give a short introduction about the topic, about the changes in nature or the context of practice, and show you what we've already done about case studies on motivating learners. Then you'll be going into the small groups for 20 minutes, and you probably already know with Zoom, when the 20 minutes are up, that's it, it's gone. You're thrown back into the big room. From you then, I'll be getting the feedback about the top tips in relation to motivation. And as Fergus said at the beginning, what we will do is we will ask each group to appoint a rapporteur to give the feedback, and they will unmute themselves and give us one top tip. And if we've time, each group can actually give a different top tip. So 3 groups might actually identify the same top tip, but we want you to go through your list and give a different top tips. So we'll ask you for maybe 1 or 2 top tips when we come back to the big group. Questions then, especially then, you can put questions into chat, and then I will actually be doing a concluding presentation, and that's about the stages involved and available for engaging and motivating learners, how you know learners are more engaged and motivated, and the resources available to you as a tutor. So again, forgive me if I'm restating things you already know, but hopefully it's going to be useful. The major policy change we've actually been experiencing in the last 10 years is the increase in the mandated learner. That's where increasing amounts of learners are referred to adult literacy services. In other words, they're not coming on a voluntary basis with a very specific objective. They're coming because they've been referred. They're coming with the loss of social welfare benefits. Now, that kind of thing is an extrinsic but negative motivator, but at least it gets them there. So for practitioners then, the nature of participation has changed from being voluntary in nature. In other words, we were used to working with people who were intrinsically motivated. So that was a game changer. Now, we also have the context of certification. Their tutors are telling me that they feel under increasing pressure to put learners in for certification. Now, I appreciate that some of you may be one-to-one voluntary tutors and you don't have that pressure, and that's a great space to be totally responsive to the needs of the learners. But others who are working with small groups do, and again, it's the change, it's adapting to the change and how to manage it so that motivation stay up, or how to use it for motivation. So in relation to certification, it's very useful if you actually understand the why we have this pressure or this demand. And if you understand the why, you'll actually be able to help learners get through the how of it. Now, Tina Byrne and myself, Tina in NALA, we did a case study on meeting the challenge, strategies for motivating learners in adult education. It's on the NALA website, and I just give you a very, very brief overview of what it consists of. The full reference is available at the end of the presentation as well. Okay, so what the case studies are about, and the marvelous thing about the case studies is it's tutors talking to tutors. It's your language, it's not academic language. So it's about the teaching and learning process. It's about progress, how tutors assess it, and what they think about giving feedback to the learners. And it's also about content of what has been taught and making it relevant. So what we did was we talked to maths tutors, Sorcha in Castlebar, Mairead in Dublin City and County. We talked to ESOL tutors, Roseanne in Limerick and Clare, Eleanor, Peter and Andrew in Tralee. Also what came up was about listening to learners, reporting it on and developing a new course in response, which of course learners find very motivating. That's from Elaine Clifford in Killarney. And then we went to level 5 tutors because they've been dealing with the issue of mandated learners far longer than adult literacy services have. So we talked to Linda, an office administration tutor, and Edwina, who works as an IT tutor for the Irish Colleges Training Centre. And again, they had a lot of tips and good ideas to share. So I'm going to kind of come back to that after your group work. So what we actually want you to do now is you're going to be put into a group, and there's 2 different types of group. Groups 1, 2 and 3 will actually deal with the process. And the question is, what do you do to engage and motivate the learner or learners in the way you work? Okay. So we want you to actually, when you get into the group, introduce, everybody get a chance to give your name, maybe your location, and the nature of your practice. Okay. And then you can actually start talking about the process, because as you know, in adult literacy, process is as important as content. Okay, You might have learners coming into you and they're focused on content because that's what they were used to getting maybe out of their secondary school system. However, it's your thinking and planning about the way you're going to do it and the way you actually do it is what makes a huge difference to learners. Then groups 4, 5 and 6. Will you work on the content question, please? And that is, how do you make the content relevant and engaging for the learners? In other words, what you actually do with the content and how you do it can make a huge difference for the learners. So this is where, when you're introducing yourself and saying the nature of your practice, you're going to hear from different areas like maths, ESOL, IT, whatever. So you'll get, you might get ideas from the others. But I'm now going to stop sharing this screen and hand you back to Fergus, who will actually set you or allocate you into your small groups. And I will see you then in 20 minutes.
Oh, you can leave your cameras on, everybody, if you want, because we're going to be doing the feedback now. So it's up to you. So we're going to, Maeve is going to be going to each group and asking for one person to give some feedback. And because of time restrictions, we can only allow you, I suppose, to give one point and elaborate on that a little bit, and then group 2 give a different point so that we don't have repetition, just only because of time constraints.
Okay, so can I go to the rapporteur? Who's the rapporteur for group number 1, please?
That's me, Maeve.
Lovely. And can I have your top tip on process, please?
So we basically said focus less on the content and more on social contact.
Lovely. Thanks very much. Now can I go to group number 2, also on process, and give us a tip that wasn't what Leah said? Who's the rapporteur for group number 2? If you didn't appoint a rapporteur, yeah.
Sorry, I think I'm sorry, I was trying to unmute. Our tip was to establish a relationship, a rapport, so you know that you get to know them.
Lovely. Okay, can we go to group number 3? Could the rapporteur for group number 3 check they're unmuted and give us your top tip, please?
Yes, hello, Claire here. We did come up with a lot of ideas, but our main one was that you need to clarify at the outset of the lesson what the learning outcomes are so that the students buy into the learning outcomes and understand why they're doing that particular lesson. Excellent. And make it relevant to the real world that they live in so that they actually can see that there's relevance.
Okay, Claire, that's terrific. I now want to go to group number 4 on content. What's your top tip? Okay, far away.
Hi, hello everyone. We've used the learners' life skills and experiences to plan lessons and to motivate them and to build relationships with the trainees or the learners.
Okay, that's great, Marie. Thank you very much. Can we go to group number 5, the rapporteur for group number 5, please? Check you're unmuted. Yeah.
We said that we assessed their needs and we tried to marry up their needs with the key learning points in the learning outcomes to give them what they want, but what we need them to have at the same time.
Great and very well put, Olivia. Thanks very much. Can we go to group number 6? Your top tip,
Carmel. Hi.
Thanks, Carmel.
Hello. We were focusing more on what kind of things you would use to help with to make the content relevant. So we had YouTube videos with feedback for things like Kahoot and giving the learners a project that they would be doing some research on. And again, you're getting the buy-in from them.
Okay, there's a lot in that, Carmel. That's great. Thanks very much. I'm now going to go back to the process group and hopefully now time will permit, can I go to group number 1 again? Leah, was there another point that hasn't been said already?
We just said the kind of the things that we'd use to try and get them to motivate was like quizzes and short TED Talks and podcasts and that kind of thing that they can feedback on and that you could kind of integrate some of the literacy into as well.
Lovely, thanks very much, Leah. Group number 2, please. Is there another point identified?
I'm Linda. Yeah, we came
Linda.
up with language experience approach. It's where we would use language that the students use so they would understand, then that would establish confidence and a buy-in.
It makes a big difference. Thanks very much, Linda. And group number 3, please, Claire. Is there another
yes,
top tip? Yep.
Show them that the learning has relevance to their day-to-day and make it appropriate to adult learners.
Lovely, thank you very much. I'm scribbling here, making these notes. Can I now go to group number 4 on content? Mairead, was there another tip that hasn't been given already?
One we came up with to make it, or we all try and make our learning very practical based, whereas it for whatever you're doing, whether you're doing ESOL or maths or whatever, is to make it very practical and tied to their everyday relationships and lives.
So it's very much getting them to put, understanding their context and what's practical for them. Okay, that's lovely. Olivia, is there another top tip you discussed that hasn't been said already?
Yeah, we said we use technology because they tend to love technology. So we use apps and the technology to get them interested and get them working on it.
Great, thanks very much, Olivia. And Carmel, in group number 6, was there another tip you had to offer?
Pretty much everything is covered there, but we would use interactive whiteboard in Teams or Google Classroom, whatever way we use it, so that we can get them to engage with content on it.
Engage content on that. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm now going to share the screen. Please, any questions or any other tips that come up for you, feel free to be putting them into chat. Now, I won't be able to see chat. I'll be relying on Ailish and Fergus to draw my attention to it. But I'm now going to share the screen. Okay. And I'm going to continue my presentation. And a lot of the points, sorry, just bear with me, slideshow from current slide. A lot of the points, yes, you've actually said them already, because I can actually see from the names I already know there's a lot of experience in the room, so I hope that's useful. Right, now, the way I like to see what we can actually do in terms of strategies, I like to break it down into before a program or a session starts, at the start of a course or session, during the session and during the program, and after. So that's the way I've organized the process parts. And again, you know this stuff. I'd say you already do it in practice. So before the session, setting SMART goals. Now, in an awful lot of the programs, goal setting is a learning outcome somewhere. So this is also about applying this to your own planning. We tend to be overambitious, which is good. We want to do more rather than less. But to get something well framed and be in control of, it's very good to have SMART goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and bound. Then at the start of a program or at the start of a session, and again, I'm very aware, this is probably what you already do in practice. So first of all, allow time to engage. In other words, allow it, and this is especially when we're face to face, but it's also online. Give learners time to psychologically, mentally set aside their current concerns and really come into the room. And I know that can be very difficult for some learners because of the severity of what they've going on for their lives. But at least when they can settle in, they can relax, they're then in the frame of learning. Managing expectations is such a huge part of the job. So Claire, you mentioned clarify at the outset the learning outcomes, and that's about managing expectations. In other words, what's the session about? What's on offer for them? What did they expect? Very relevant at the start of a course, very difficult to do if you have to manage rolling intake. You have to go back and back and back, and it needs reviewing all the time. The yellow point there is normalize the hopes and fears of learners. And this is the power of working in small groups, because when each gets a chance to say what their hope and their fear is, and they hear that they're very similar to everybody else, as you know, it's the magic of group work. But it's still very relevant if you're in a one-to-one relationship. You normalize their lifelong learning strengths, that they already are bringing something to the room, that this is not going to be like school, and that can be a difficult one because of the power of the conditioning, the years in a system, it's their default position. And normalize, this is a learning space. It's uncomfortable. I call it the discomfort zone. And normalize the fact that in the comfort zone where we're really comfortable, no learning is happening. It's in the discomfort zone where we're unsettled, where we're struggling with something, that's when learning is happening. So they just take it for granted that that's the way it works. The blue point is treat certification as a byproduct. In other words, the learners are generating evidence that goes into their folders. In other words, it's not the big mental hurdle of an autodafé, a trial by fire. It's just very straightforward as you go process. As Claire said, discuss the plan for the session. So you explain what the learning outcomes are, the goals for the session. You use the language that's appropriate for that learner or for that group of learners. And that's the chance then to have questions and answers about it if they have any concerns. And then the last one, ask the learners what they already know about the topic when something new is being introduced. Okay, and that's where it's a reminder to them that they're already bringing in experiential learning. And then you can also recap to remind them what they did in the previous session. Okay, so during, now my favorite, as all my students know, I say there is no such thing as a stupid question. As Linda Ryan in Meeting the Challenge case study said, I am not a mind reader. I tell my students, I am not a mind reader. I need them to actually ask the question. The fact that they have a question is not an indication that they are stupid, right? And they find that when they do ask the question, others were thinking the same thing. So the heads are nodding. So they get good validation for it. Okay, use a range of teaching methods. In other words, you're not teaching as you learn, you're mixing it up. You're trying out one way of doing it, the next way of doing it, interactive discussion, whiteboard-based, active learning, and you're observing what's working. Now, you don't do one whole session, one whole 2-hour session, except in the one-to-one situation. You can actually just take it as it goes because you're watching that learner. But use the range of teaching methods that are going to be appropriate. And of course, for those of you who are working with groups, you're working with spiky profiles. And this is the art in how to actually help groups work together. It can be pair work, it can be small group work. And the value of that I'm going to come to in a second. And of course, the last point there then is give feedback on learning achievements. If you have at the start of the session explained what the session is about and what the learning goal is, that's what you give the feedback on. So That's what people believe. They believe feedback based on evidence. It's not, you're not saying you're doing great. You're saying you actually did that exercise well. I can see you struggled with the previous one. Okay, that's valued far more, and that's actually very motivating. So in relation to the spiky profiles and pair work and small group work, you're already very familiar with this. We learn 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see, 50% we both see and hear, 70% of what is discussed with others, 80% of what we experience personally, and 95% of what we teach to someone else. So the very fact that in a small group, somebody is helping somebody while they're also learning something, the learning actually goes very deep. Then at the end of a session, you can recap. In other words, what was the session about? And of course, if you've actually planned it and you were clear about the learning outcomes, it's easy to recap. And then it's very useful to signpost to what's coming next. Some people need a map. And again, I recall the Linda Ryan case study. Linda would actually visually portray program. She would be with a group of level 5 learners for a whole year, but she would actually indicate how far they are on, how far they're progressing. So they would actually get a visual sense. Yes, we had a lot of chat today, we had a lot of fun today, but we actually got that bit covered, and this is what's coming next. Again, when you're clear about what your objectives are, you can actually summarize the learning and the goal that was achieved. Now, it can also normalize the need to practice it or apply it or do something with it. So you can suggest how to apply the learning or practice it and deepen it. If you know that they can actually do something with it, and I know that means the relationship has to be there, you have to understand something about their social context. What practical, what is relevant to them, right? And if they can actually work with it outside of the class, they're going to deepen the learning. Otherwise, something that's actually learned in the class can be very quickly forgotten, and that's what we call shallow learning. As you know, the big criticism of the exam-based system and the Leaving Cert is it's shallow learning. Whereas adults, when they get a chance to have time plus task, in other words, practice, it's extending the learning, but it's deepening the learning. And that means their sense of themselves, their motivation, how they see themselves as learners is actually changing for the better. Then, after the session, what can you do? Okay, you can reflect. What worked? What was difficult? What would you change? Okay, and we normally only do this if something went wrong or didn't go to plan. But if you can actually do it systematically, if you have 10 or 15 minutes after the session, just with those questions or other questions, it's very useful to you. And that enables you to be more responsive for the next session or identify a difficulty that needs to be addressed. You can also identify what needs to be reported. Are there needs in relation to progression, the time available, the interests of the group that you can't address? Okay, so that's how new programs are developed or worked up. Okay, you don't have to do everything. You're not there to do everything. And then, of course, assessment. And this is assessment, not in the form of external standards, but it's about naming what the learner is achieving in relation to their starting point. Some of you may be familiar with mapping the learning journey or with the assessment system in Atabi. And they're about the learner, the gains the learner is making. You hold the evidence. You remind the learner of what it is they're learning, because if they're tired, they get discouraged. But if you can remind them, actually they were able to gain steps, or they learned some new skills in a previous session, that brings them back into it instead of saying, I can't. Okay, Liz McSpeen pulled together all of the assessment practices, especially kind of an updated version of Mapping the Learning Journey for Solace recently, and it's on the Solace website. Very, very good. It's very nicely put together. Now, in relation to content, and I know learners is quite different in different topic areas, but generally what you can do, and you've actually already mentioned it, you can actually consider how to order or integrate content. How many learning outcomes can you cover with one activity? So you don't have to be driven by a linear approach to a syllabus or a set of learning outcomes. And if you're able to work with peers, you can actually combine and integrate. So something done in one module can be used in another module. Again, it's an opportunity to do more with the topic. You can also use a problem-based approach. So if you lead with a question, you generate curiosity about it. And curiosity is a very human instinct. So just having the question there means that the learner, even when struggling or confused, bears that question in mind and new information attaches to it. And again, anybody who reads detective fiction knows that what's satisfying about it is there's a puzzle or a question at the start that's resolved at the end. So any of you who are actually using puzzles and fun games, that's probably what's working very well. It has the beginning, the middle, and the end, but they're engaged. So yes, you plan active learning. The more domains of learning that are being used, not just the cognitive domain, the head, but also the psychomotor domain, the hands, what are they doing with it, as well as the affective and the emotional domain. Provide examples, of course, that are relevant to the learner. Can't think of any examples? Learners will think of the examples. Language experience approach, thank you, Linda, you mentioned that. It seems too simple, really, but in practice, the words and the voices and the tones and the accents that people are familiar with is very, very helpful in this context. Critical literacy then is stepping it up a bit. That's using the materials familiar to the learner, but showing them in an activity how they apply in real life. So it's not just reading the word. Yes, that's relevant to the learner and the learner's life, but it's reading the world. In other words, where the opportunities arise, such as general election posters and voting materials. Okay, and lastly there, chunk material to work with natural attention. Okay, 50 minutes on one activity, especially if it's a physical activity, it's a highly engaging activity. It's long enough. We break it then, and I have to remind myself now to break it up as well. So coming towards a conclusion, it's about a good space for learning. It's about boundaries being managed well. In other words, people are clear, they're settling in, there's the main task, recap at the end. But also that the learner has a sense of safety and a sense that they are respected. But then how do you know that the level of motivation is improving? And I'd say all of you can actually answer this question. It's about attendance. A person makes the effort, the person wants to be there. It's about learner asking questions if they've been silent, or asking more questions if they have been able to ask a question before. So you're observing the move from what we call silence to voice. So it's evidence that the learner is wanting to know more. You also hear comments like, is that the time already? Or where did the time go? And your learner will have a go at an exercise. So they might start out feeling very reluctant, very reserved. And I see that somebody in the Padlet, in one of the groups on process, mentioned role play. So, you know, the first time a role play is done, that can be very, very scary, but you know the level of motivation is good if they'll have a go at it. Then for those of you who are working with groups, you can get the good group process enabling these kind of movements, enabling these increased levels of motivation. And you know that because at the outset, an individual could be saying to that. But then when there's a good process, there's a move to we can. In other words, as a group, they feel confident, they feel safe. And then the next step is, and it naturally occurs with a good group process, it's I would like to. That's when you know it's really working, really engaged, really motivated. Now, the next bit is about you. Okay, it's about peer learning and support. So as you motivate your learners, what motivates you? As you provide a good space for your learners, where is your good space for learning? Are you using the 4 sources for reflection available to you, which is yourself, your learners, theory, and your peers? Well, obviously the answer is yes to the last one because you're here. And in current circumstances, I find that informal peer learning opportunities became absolutely vital. So WhatsApp groups of peers. And then when a problem or an issue or a difficulty is identified, a Zoom meeting where somebody is leading it, somebody is showing how to use Padlet, how to use Zoom, how to use a new platform. They're more important than ever in these circumstances. Of course, you also have the more formal peer learning opportunities. The NALA website resources, the network events like this, CPD in ETBs or your own organizations, and the WIC NALA courses that some of you have been on. Especially, for example, if you're interested in reading more on motivation, the psychology of adult learning, a module on that. So the NALA resources then, you're probably already very familiar with the website and how it's organized and what's available. We have the case study series. The I can't even see the top one there. Oh yes, the most recent one is the Wealth Model in Adult Literacy, Transformative Learning in Action. Again, it's the voice, the words, the experiences of tutors speaking to tutors. Meeting the challenge I've already referred to, then case studies about literacy and numeracy in action, and case studies of teaching reading. There's also the publication, the research on identifying and reducing barriers to participation in adult literacy and numeracy tuition, because you're aware, if you're concerned about attending to motivation, the barriers to motivation have to be addressed. Okay, and always, especially in relation to working with the spiky profiles, working with the fact that adult learners are already bringing some kind of experience and knowledge into it. They're all reflected in the good practice guidelines that are there. And remember, I mentioned Liz McSkeen's work on assessment methods. It sounds that it could be a very dull subject, but when you actually go to Solace, open it up, you'll see there's some very practical and very validating practices recommended to Solace. So thank you for listening. I'm going to stop sharing now and back to the group and see, have we any questions?
Okay, thanks very much, Maeve. That was really insightful. Lots and lots of ideas and tips and links to research etc. So thanks very much for that. If anyone has any questions or any tips or anything else you'd like to share with Maeve or the group, you can just unmute yourself and fire away. Just before you do, I see there's a message from Sarah Webster. Thanks, Sarah. Sarah says, in our group, we talked about having a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset to promote confidence, which in turn motivates the student. Yeah, very true.
Can I just comment on that one, Fergus? That's really interesting because that's what you're doing. That's the kind of transformation, and Carol Dweck's material on the internet in relation to creating a growth mindset or observing. How do you know there's a growth mindset? Because again, people have heard me say before, if what I say to learners, you can't if you think you can't, you can if you think you can, either way. In other words, if you don't have a growth mindset, you're not going to learn. And you can be putting your best efforts into trying to motivate somebody, but that's what you're dealing with. But when you can actually see the things that work to put them into the growth mindset, it's so exciting.
Okay, thanks, Maeve. If anyone has another question, please unmute yourself, or another point or another tip or something that you do or try, feel free to unmute yourself and speak. In the meantime, Maeve, a few people have typed in, thank you, very interesting, very enjoyable, etc. So thanks to Kay and Kathy and Mairead for those messages for Maeve. So Sarah Webster's also saying there, I think a sense of humor is really important too. Yeah, good point, Sarah.
Hi, I'd just like to say something, Fergus. I'd just like to say that at the moment it's a very different learning experience for tutors and also for learners, and motivation has changed a lot, and how you encourage, keep motivation, keep tutors going, because I think you have to understand that English learning maybe isn't a priority for some students at the moment. That's all. I just wanted to make that point, that it isn't a priority. When we get back to the classroom, hopefully very soon, then it's much easier to put into practice everything that we have heard today.
I think that's an excellent point, Brenda, because it reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if the lower order needs need to be addressed, it's actually very difficult for somebody to address higher order needs such as growth and development. And again, I suppose just normalize this for yourself. And of course, your awareness is how it's impacting on you, and that helps you normalize it for your learners. Hopefully it's temporary, but for those who can engage with the technological side, and to know that they have a facilitator there to guide them how to do that, that is so empowering and so motivating. So very good point, Brenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. Quite a few people agree with your point and liked it, because we've got a lot of positive feedback on that. So yeah, if there's anything else, unmute yourself. I'll just read out one or two more comments. And so Linda saying, thanks, Maeve and Nala, great webinar. And thanks to group 2. Linda's obviously in group 2, a great sharing of ideas, and I will definitely use these going forward. So thanks for that, Linda. Maeve Keegan saying, this is a great time to work on conversation with ESOL learners. Good point, Maeve.
No, just on that, it's not to take away from what Brenda said there. She's perfectly right. Sorry, I just put the video. You're perfectly right, Brenda. And the technology aspect that Maeve said is a huge thing. Like, not everybody is into it. And plus people have kids and they're doing the primary school teaching with them and everything. But I found the best way to manage, because my group disengaged, now they've really re-engaged, is I'm just doing half-hour conversation slots with them in the time I'd normally have the class. So the ones that will engage, like there's a couple who dropped out, kind of, they've just got too much on. But they love the one-on-one, and I think that's one way around it. They don't like doing the whole Zoom class thing, but the one-on-one. Anyway, just talking. Thanks, sorry.
Thanks, Niamh. Yeah. I think that's it, Maeve. It just leaves me to say big thanks again to Maeve for a wonderful presentation, for thoughtful and insightful, so many ideas, and to everybody who's joined in. It seems the groups worked and the groups had plenty of their own suggestions and ideas, which was great, which we wanted. We wanted to try and have a little bit more networking. Some of the webinars we had between St. Patrick's Day and Christmas were, there wasn't much opportunity for tutors to share ideas or etc. So this is why we're trying this. So we're going to go with this method for a little while and see how it goes, and then maybe we'll reassess. So even if you wanted to email in whether you think this kind of method of doing a webinar works, or would you rather just listen to a speaker and type in questions? So thanks, Maeve, that was great, really appreciate it. And thanks, Ailish, for helping out on the organisation. I had a few things that I was panicking about, you might have noticed, everyone, but Ailish set me right on them. So okay, listen, thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. The sun is out here in Dublin, so I hope it's out where you are as well. Bye. Okay.